Tyler Nulisch was found alone on his apartment floor. Investigators were told it was a blackout, and one judicial mistake nearly erased the truth. But what detectives uncovered would turn a quiet death into a haunting national mystery. Tyler Nulisch lived a life that rarely drew attention. He rented a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood where nights passed without sirens and mornings began without urgency. He worked steady hours, paid his bills on time, and kept to himself. Neighbors described him as polite but distant, the kind of person whose presence blended into the background. Nothing about his routine suggested danger, and nothing about his past hinted at a violent end. On the day Tyler died, everything appeared normal. He followed his usual schedule, running errands and returning home before nightfall. Security cameras in nearby buildings captured him entering his apartment complex alone. He did not look distressed or unsteady. His posture was relaxed, his movements unhurried. To anyone watching, it was just another quiet evening in a quiet town. Hours later, the calm was broken when emergency responders arrived at his apartment. Tyler was found unresponsive on the floor, his body positioned in a way that suggested he had collapsed suddenly. There were no obvious signs of a struggle. Furniture was mostly undisturbed, doors were locked, and nothing appeared stolen. At first glance, it looked like a tragic but simple case of a medical emergency. Authorities initially leaned toward a blackout. Tyler had no history of violence, no known enemies, and no documented medical conditions that raised concern. The scene lacked the chaos often associated with foul play. Still, the atmosphere felt wrong. Small details stood out to those trained to notice them. A glass left near the sink was not fully dry. An object near the couch seemed slightly out of place. These details alone meant little, but together they created a sense of unease. As paramedics examined the body, faint marks were noticed on Tyler's arms. They were subtle and easy to overlook, not the kind that immediately signaled an attack. The assumption remained that he had lost consciousness and fallen. Yet the marks did not fully align with that explanation. A decision was made to request a full autopsy, a step that quietly shifted the direction of the case. News of Tyler's death spread quickly. In a town unaccustomed to tragedy, speculation filled the silence left by unanswered questions. Some believed it was an unfortunate accident. Others sensed something darker beneath the surface. Friends struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet man they knew with the mystery surrounding his final hours. Investigators began building a timeline, collecting phone records, transaction histories, and surveillance footage. Early findings failed to provide clarity. Instead, they introduced inconsistencies that did not fit neatly into the blackout theory. Tyler's phone activity showed unusual gaps. His final movements, while seemingly ordinary, lacked a clear explanation for what followed. What began as a straightforward case slowly transformed into something far more complex. The absence of obvious violence made the truth harder to grasp, not easier. As the investigation moved forward, one unsettling question refused to fade. Had Tyler Nulisch simply collapsed, or had something far more deliberate taken place behind closed doors? As investigators continued their work, attention shifted from the scene to Tyler's final days. His life had followed a steady pattern, which made any deviation stand out sharply. Phone records showed that he had been active in the days leading up to his death, but there were unexplained gaps on the night it happened. These gaps were not long, yet they occurred at critical moments, suggesting his phone may have been intentionally left untouched or disabled. The autopsy results complicated the picture further. While the official cause of death was still undetermined, toxicology tests revealed substances in Tyler's system that had not been prescribed to him. The levels were not immediately fatal, but they were strong enough to cause confusion, dizziness, and memory loss. This discovery raised serious concerns about how those substances entered his body and whether they played a role in his collapse. Investigators returned to the apartment with a more critical eye. Items that once appeared harmless now felt significant. A drinking glass was tested for residue. Fabric fibers were collected from the couch and floor. Smudge marks near the doorframe suggested repeated contact, as if someone had leaned there for support or restraint. None of these details proved a crime on their own, but together they weakened the idea of a simple blackout. Surveillance footage from nearby buildings added another layer of uncertainty. A figure was captured entering the apartment complex late that night and leaving within a short window of time. The video quality was poor, and the individual's face was not visible. The timing, however, overlapped with the unexplained gaps in Tyler's phone activity. Investigators could not confirm whether the person was connected to Tyler, but the coincidence was troubling. Attention then turned to the people in Tyler's life. Though he kept a low profile, he was not completely isolated. A small group of acquaintances had been in contact with him during the final week. Their accounts of when they last saw or spoke to Tyler were mostly consistent, but minor contradictions began to surface during follow-up interviews. Times shifted slightly. Details were forgotten or remembered differently. These inconsistencies were subtle, yet persistent. Financial records revealed unusual activity as well. Small transfers had been made from Tyler's account shortly before his death. The amounts were not large enough to raise alarms on their own, but the recipients were unfamiliar. Investigators questioned whether Tyler was under pressure or involved in something he had not shared with others. The case began to divide opinions. Some investigators believed Tyler's death was the result of impaired judgment caused by substances, leading to a fatal accident. Others argued that the growing list of inconsistencies pointed toward deliberate involvement by another person. Without clear evidence of violence, the truth remained just out of reach. As public interest grew, the case took on a life of its own. Media attention focused on the haunting question at its center. Was Tyler Nulisch the victim of a tragic blackout, or was his death carefully staged to look like one? With no clear conclusion in sight, investigators widened their scope and turned to Tyler's digital footprint. His phone and computer were analyzed in detail, revealing patterns that had gone unnoticed at first. Messages deleted shortly before his death were partially recovered. While the content did not directly suggest violence, the tone revealed stress and unease. Tyler appeared distracted and concerned, as if dealing with something he did not fully understand or feel safe discussing. Email records showed sudden changes in behavior. Tyler had searched for information related to memory loss, sudden blackouts, and unfamiliar substances. These searches suggested he may have already experienced symptoms before the night he died. This raised a chilling possibility that the final incident was not isolated, but part of a larger pattern. Financial investigators continued reviewing his bank records. The small transfers discovered earlier were traced to accounts linked to temporary services and intermediaries, making their purpose difficult to identify. None of the transactions were illegal on their own, yet their timing suggested urgency. Tyler had not withdrawn large sums or made purchases that explained the transfers. This fueled speculation that he was paying for something he did not fully control. The autopsy findings were re-examined by an independent forensic specialist. This second review highlighted minor internal injuries that were inconsistent with a simple fall. The injuries suggested controlled pressure rather than sudden impact. While still not definitive, this assessment raised serious doubts about the blackout theory and introduced the possibility of restraint during Tyler's final moments. Investigators revisited the apartment once more, reconstructing the scene with this new perspective. The position of Tyler's body, the spacing between furniture, and the lack of defensive damage began to tell a different story. It appeared increasingly likely that Tyler lost consciousness while already in a vulnerable position. Witnesses who had previously offered limited information were questioned again. One neighbor recalled hearing faint sounds during the night, initially dismissed as routine noise. Another remembered seeing unfamiliar shoes outside an apartment door briefly before disappearing. These details, once considered insignificant, now carried weight. Despite these developments, the case remained fragile. Every new piece of evidence added suspicion but stopped short of certainty. There was no clear weapon, no direct confession, and no single moment that could be definitively labeled as murder. This uncertainty weighed heavily on investigators, who felt they were circling the truth without being able to grasp it. Just as the case seemed stalled once more, a delayed report from a forensic lab arrived. Its findings challenged earlier assumptions and hinted that the line between blackout and murder was far thinner than anyone had believed. The delayed forensic report changed the direction of the investigation almost overnight. It identified traces of a rare sedative in Tyler's system, one not commonly found in household environments or over-the-counter medication. The substance was known to cause rapid disorientation, muscle weakness, and partial memory loss. Most importantly, it required deliberate administration. This discovery sharply weakened the blackout theory and suggested Tyler had not collapsed on his own. With this new information, investigators re-examined every step taken since the case began. The original scene was reviewed again through photographs and measurements. The placement of Tyler's body now appeared more deliberate than accidental. His position suggested he had been guided or held at some point before losing consciousness. The faint marks on his arms, once considered insignificant, now aligned with this possibility. Attention returned to the unidentified figure captured on surveillance footage. Analysts enhanced the video as much as possible, revealing details previously overlooked. The person's height, posture, and walking pattern were analyzed and compared to individuals connected to Tyler. While the face remained unclear, the timing of the figure's arrival and departure closely matched the estimated window when the sedative would have taken effect. Investigators re-interviewed those closest to Tyler, focusing on inconsistencies that had been brushed aside earlier. One individual's account stood out. Their timeline no longer aligned with digital location data obtained from cell tower records. While the discrepancy was small, it placed them closer to Tyler's apartment than they had originally admitted. This raised serious suspicion, though it still fell short of direct proof. As the case gained momentum, it entered the courtroom for preliminary proceedings. During this stage, a critical decision was made by the presiding judge. Key forensic evidence, including early interpretations of the arm marks and body positioning, was ruled inconclusive and excluded from consideration. The ruling stunned investigators, who believed this evidence formed the backbone of the emerging theory. The exclusion had immediate consequences. Without those details, the case once again leaned toward uncertainty. Prosecutors hesitated to move forward aggressively, fearing the evidence would not withstand legal scrutiny. Detectives felt their work unraveling, not because the truth was unclear, but because it could no longer be fully presented. Public reaction was swift and intense. Media coverage framed the ruling as a devastating mistake. Questions arose about whether procedural caution had overridden common sense. Tyler's death, once again, risked being labeled an unfortunate incident rather than a possible crime. Despite the setback, investigators refused to let the case fade. They continued quietly, reviewing overlooked files and rechecking records that had not been part of the original strategy. Beneath layers of discarded information, they hoped to find something undeniable, something strong enough to withstand any ruling. As pressure mounted and time passed, one overlooked document began to surface, threatening to undo everything that had been dismissed. The overlooked document emerged from a stack of early medical reports that had been filed but never fully examined. It detailed a pattern of injuries that, when viewed together, told a far more disturbing story than any single report had suggested. These injuries were subtle and easily dismissed in isolation, but combined they indicated controlled force applied over a short period of time. This directly contradicted the idea of a sudden blackout or accidental collapse. Investigators reconstructed Tyler's final hours once more, now armed with this critical information. The rare sedative, the unexplained phone gaps, the financial transfers, and the surveillance footage all began to align into a single timeline. Tyler had likely been impaired before he lost consciousness, making him vulnerable and unable to protect himself. The absence of chaos in the apartment now made sense. There had been no struggle because there had been no opportunity to resist. Pressure mounted to reassess the earlier judicial decision. Legal experts reviewed the ruling and questioned whether caution had crossed into error. The judge's exclusion of key evidence became a focal point of public debate, with many arguing that the case had been weakened not by lack of proof, but by how that proof was interpreted. As the investigation reopened under renewed scrutiny, additional digital evidence was quietly uncovered. Location data, previously considered too imprecise, was reanalyzed using updated methods. This placed the unidentified figure from the surveillance footage in Tyler's apartment for a brief but critical window of time. While the individual's identity was still not publicly confirmed, the likelihood of Tyler being alone during his final moments diminished significantly. The narrative surrounding Tyler Nulisch's death shifted permanently. No longer was it viewed as a simple medical incident. It became a symbol of how easily the truth can be buried when early assumptions go unchallenged. Detectives involved in the case described it as one of the most frustrating investigations of their careers, not because the clues were absent, but because they were nearly ignored. Though the case never reached a dramatic courtroom conclusion, its impact was lasting. Policy reviews were initiated, forensic standards were questioned, and investigative procedures were re-examined. Tyler's story became part of a larger conversation about accountability within the justice system. In the end, the question of blackout or murder remained officially unresolved. Yet for those who followed the evidence, the answer felt painfully clear. Tyler's death was not just a personal tragedy, but a cautionary tale about how a single misjudgment can delay justice indefinitely. The case left behind a haunting reminder that sometimes the truth is not lost, but set aside, waiting for someone to look again.